Welcome into Teal The Show. I'm Jamal Saints here alongside Frank Frangie. Frank, feels like forever ago that the Jaguars played that Thursday night game at this point, but you know what? That still makes this victory Monday. Jaguars are rolling a little bit now, 5-2, pretty good spot to be in right now.
Yeah, I love the way these Thursday night games, you get the weekend off. I think they love it, and I think we love it, sort of a mini bye. But yeah, they're playing very well. They've become a team that knows how to win and expects to win games. That's the whole key, is when you expect to win and you know how to win, you win. We knew they had a good team. The next step is emotionally and mentally being a team that finds a way to win when things don't go well. That's what the good teams do. It's what the veteran teams do, and they're at a very good place at 5-2. They really are.
All right, a mini bye at the perfect time of year. Jaguars are a little bit banged up, so they could use some extra rest. Good news is they only have one more game, and then they have their actual bye week, so a lot of rest on the way for this team. Let's talk about some of the things that came in the fallout from the Thursday night game.
Okay.
So part of the Thursday night coverage, Richard Sherman, former NFL player, always been a kind of outspoken guy, made some comments about Trevor Lawrence, said that maybe he hasn't seen him be that great generational quarterback that everyone hyped him up to be. Trevor Lawrence clearly maybe heard some of that outside noise, sending out a tweet. Trevor doesn't tweet very often, so when he does, everybody kind of turns their head, and I'll paraphrase it, but he said basically, you analysts can keep saying whatever you want, and we'll just keep winning football games. To the end of that, Frank, Richard Sherman saying that he hasn't seen the steps from Trevor Lawrence. I know kind of where you're going to go with this pretty easily.
Yeah.
The guy's in his third year. I think he's easily a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. What else does he need to do?
Here's what I think. I think when you've been talked about as much as Trevor Lawrence has since the 9th grade, people look for reasons to say you're this or you're that. I think Trevor's a guy he wants to say something about. Richard Sherman probably wanted to say something different than everybody else was saying. That's what he's kind of a new media guy, and new media guys want to say something that other people haven't said. That's all that was. Listen, we all know where Trevor's headed. We all know where Trevor is. Good for Trevor. Good for Trevor saying, hey, say what you want. I'm going to keep doing my thing. Well, you know what? He is going to keep doing his thing. Trevor Lawrence is at a great place. I love everything about the guy, Jamal. I love the fact that he's understated, that he's not, hey, look at me, that he's just a regular guy, and he's a really good player. And I can tell you this, too. Those guys in that locker room, offensive guys, defensive guys, special teams guys, trainers, coaches, really respect the way that guy handles himself and the way he conducts business. I know that sounds like a cliche, but they really do. Trevor Lawrence is just fine. Sorry, Richard. Trevor's just fine.
He is definitely just fine. Let's stay on Trevor for a second. I mentioned going into it that he doesn't tweet very often. This is probably just the second time this season that he's sent out a post. I guess it's an X post now, not a tweet anymore. Whatever it is. Trevor sent out that one. Before that, he tweeted out after the Texans lost when the Jaguars were 1-2, and he just a couple of emojis, note-taking. That was when the conversation nationally was that the Jaguars maybe were a little overrated. All of a sudden, Jaguars have rattled off 4 straight wins since then. So maybe every time he sends out something, it's good news. Maybe that outside noise does give that guy a little bit of extra fuel to his fire.
I think the most important thing he said is he doesn't do it very often. Trevor's not worried about Twitter, and Trevor's not worried about social media, and he's not worried about what people think. Trevor's worried about leading the Jaguars. I'll say this again. The rules have changed now for the Jags because they're one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the NFL. People are going to watch a little closer. People are going to criticize a little harder. They understand that. Trevor understands it. The team understands that. But know this, of the 32 teams, they're now one of the 6, 7, or 8 best. That's the reality. That's not just a bunch of Jacksonville guys saying it. That's a reality. And with that comes more expectations and more criticism. And I think they're built for that, and I think Trevor's built for that.
So Trevor Lawrence, a former #1 overall pick. Jaguars just happen to have another #1 overall pick on their roster, Trayvon Walker. Now, we've talked a lot about Trayvon Walker and what he is doing on the field and maybe what people think he's not doing as much. Now, when this week was all said and done, Jaguars did play Thursday night football. According to ESPN Analytics, Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker were both in the top 10 for pass rush win rate for their games this week. Trayvon Walker maybe not stat sheet stuffing at the moment, but he's doing a lot of little things that maybe go unnoticed the first time you watch a game.
Well, 2 or 3 things. Trayvon Walker's a good player. There's no debating the fact that the guy's a good football player, and he's going to be a good football player wherever he winds up playing. He doesn't have a lot of sacks. And look, when you're the first overall pick in the draft and you're an outside linebacker, defensive end guy, people expect you to have sacks. He's also always going to be compared to Aiden Hutchinson, who was the 2nd pick. And there was a lot of talk about which ones were going to go first. I said this at the time of the draft. I've said this to you. I've said this on the air. He's not going to have as many sacks as Aiden Hutchinson. They play differently. That's just how it's going to be. I think he's a good player, and I think he's playing well. I still think he's a better hand-on-the-ground player than a stand-up guy. I've always thought that. I think that's when he's at his best. And I do think he needs to make more plays. He was the first overall pick in the draft, and the first overall pick in the draft has to have some sack numbers. So that's got to get better. He's playing okay. I don't know if he's playing great, But I think Trevor Lawrence, I think Trayvon Walker's playing just fine. I really do.
Jaguars they're doing good. Overall, the defense has been fantastic. Whether or not Trayvon's playing fine, great, whatever it is, the defense as a whole is getting the job done. I know we were kind of worried about the pass rush, but their pass rush plan, it's working. You can't really argue too much with it.
Jamal, the story of the team is the defense. I think the offense has been good. Trevor's been what you expected. Those receivers, Calvin Ridley's had some big games. ETN is playing at a really high level. But the story of this team has been the defense. Nobody saw that coming. Nobody thought 7 games in it would be one of the better defenses. Tough, physical. The cornerbacks are playing so well. Tyson Campbell and Darius Williams and Trey Herndon. And then Tyson goes down, and Monteric Brown comes in and makes the play of the game to save the game. The safeties are playing great. I think Andre Sisco's headed to the Pro Bowl. I think Foye Aluakar might be the best middle linebacker in the league. Devin Lloyd's played at a good level. The story of this Jaguars season, at least in my mind, the first 7 games, is how good that defense has been. Tough, fast, physical. They're playing at a great level. And, by the way, tip of the cap to Mike Caldwell, who's the guy calling the plays. We weren't sure how good he'd be, a first-time coordinator. He's done a great job. He really has.
Mike Caldwell's going to get some interviews this year.
Sure is.
Head coach. If this defense keeps playing this way, people are going to want to interview that guy for those head coaching positions. All right, the Jaguars still have a long season in front of them. Coming up when Teal The Show returns, we'll start to talk a little bit about what's next for the team and what you can expect down the stretch. That's straight ahead when Teal The Show returns. Welcome back into Teal The Show. This is year 2 of that Doug Peterson experiment, the Doug Peterson era. And so far, he's done a fantastic job of flipping this roster and teaching the players what they needed to learn. And that's how to win football games. The Jaguars this year, completely different from what they were at this time a year ago. Last year, October was tough. They went 0 for 5. So far in October this year, Jaguars are 4-0, and Doug Peterson says his team is young, but they're a veteran group that knows how to stay in tough football games.
You know, it's amazing too how nothing really shocks this team, whether you're up, 14, 17, or down 14 or 10. I mean, these guys just continue to play, and somewhere somebody's going to make a play, and that's what I ask them to do. We don't go chasing plays. We just make the ones that come to us, and that's what the guys are doing right now. And so, learning how to win. I think our guys are figuring that out, and it's good to see.
Frank, when I talk to Jaguars fans, I've been asked the question multiple times, why don't the Jaguars win those games? Why does it feel like the Steelers and the Ravens are always in those dirty games where they can find a way to win? And fans had asked me multiple times, why don't the Jaguars find a way to win those games? Now, the Jaguars are in those games and winning those games where they maybe don't play their best football.
When you're a team that is accustomed to winning, Steelers and Ravens and the Patriots all those years with Brady. When you're the Chiefs now, when you expect to win, you play a little better. You play a little more confidently. You expect something good to happen, the ball to bounce the right way, and for whatever reason it does. I really believe that. I really believe it works that way in all sports, but really in football. Well, the Jags have become that team now. I think against New Orleans, even when the Saints came back and tied the game and that place was rocking, I was there, man. It was loud. But I still think the Jags expected that they would find a way to win. And I think watching the game, you expected that. That's part of maturation. That's what Doug's talking about there. It's part of the maturation of a young team, learning how to win, and part of that's expecting to win and expecting good things to happen.
This team is really starting to figure it out, and it's all starting to come together. Jaguars are 5-2 at this point in the season. When we look at that AFC South, they've got a little bit of space, but maybe not enough breathing room to feel real comfortable. Some of the national guys are saying that they maybe have a little bit more faith in the Texans to win the division down the stretch. I think we've talked about this here on Teal The Show, Frank. The Texans are by far the biggest competition in the division for the Jaguars, and they do have a little bit easier schedule. Of course, that's what happens when you finish lower down in the rankings, and the Jaguars won the division a year ago. Jaguars do have what it takes, and the schedule's not maybe as daunting as we thought it was going into the season.
Yeah, but there's a tough stretch coming up. There's no question about that. But back to the Texans. Look, the Texans have earned that a little. They've been better than people thought they would be. They beat the Jaguars soundly on the road. The next time they play the Jaguars, they get it at their place. So I understand that. I think the Jags are better than the Texans. I think the Jags are going to win the division. I said that before the season. I still think they're better. I think that was your one lay-and-egg game. The Lions just had their lay-and-egg game. People have that. But nonetheless, you got to beat the Texans. You got to beat them there. And they're a good young team with a good young quarterback. So I get it. But the Jags are a better team. But I do think the schedule's daunting coming up. I think there's some tough games coming up, which is why the next game, which I think is one the Jags should and will win, is important because the schedule gets tough after that.
So the Jaguars were 5-2. Just a year ago, this same time of year, the Titans were 5-2. How important is it to finish down the stretch. I think that's an
Right.
exact example of you can't just write off the season now and say, oh, they're a good team. It's all over with. Let's roll.
They play the Steelers, and they're better than the Steelers. And they tend to play well against the Steelers. Steelers aren't very good offensively. They're 4-2, but I don't know how. I think they've done it with defense and smoke and mirrors. I think the Jags win that game. Then there's an off week. Then I do think it gets tough. The San Francisco 49ers might be the best team in the league. Cincinnati and Baltimore in some of the games. Then road game, both the Tennessee, both here and there, at the Texans. So I think the schedule gets tough, which is why get to that 6-2 spot, get to that break, catch your breath a little bit, which makes the next game a very important game in my mind.
All right, that game after the bye week, Frank, that Jaguars-49ers game, I want you to put on the Roger Goodell NFL hat right now. That's a game between two teams in their conferences that are going to be, at least in the conversation at the time, for sure, to be one of the top teams in each of the independent conferences. Sunday night game that week, not exactly that competitive. Would that be a game in your mind you think might be worth flexing? Because the NFL still has a little bit of time to make that decision. If
I do. I think you'd have to flex out of Jets-Raiders, though. And Jets-Raiders, that's the Heidi game, the legendary Heidi game. People remember that. It's also the biggest market in the NFL. It's also another high glitzy market in Las Vegas. So I would be a little surprised if NBC decides not to televise a game that involves a New York team and a Las Vegas team, regardless of the teams. I think it's two better teams. I'd love to see it flexed, but I think that'd be awesome for everybody involved. Two really good, might be two Super Bowl teams, by the way, the Jags and the 49ers, but I wouldn't expect that game to be flexed. I'd be a little bit surprised.
Fair enough, but I do like the early Super Bowl possibility from Frank Frangie. We'll talk more about that later on in the season. There's plenty of time to talk the road to Vegas. Frank, thanks for being here. Thank you at home for tuning in. We'll talk more about the Steelers on Friday. Good night, everybody, and go Jags.